If you've ever wondered whether poets know anything about making money, the answer is one of them does, and he wrote down everything that he knows in this book right here. I barely knew anything about this guy before I bought the book. I could have just downloaded it, but enough poets have starved already, so I just paid for it. The book is called How to Get Rich by Felix Dennis, and during his career, he's made somewhere in the vicinity of, he actually has no idea. He literally is so wealthy, or was so wealthy, that he has no idea how much money he had, which is kind of what he says in the book. Like, if you're rich, you know exactly how much money you have, but if you're wealthy, you're never really entirely sure. And so he would definitely qualify as wealthy. He put together a fortune of about between 600 million and 900 million during the course of his career. He founded a few magazines. One of them was Maxim magazine and a bunch of others. Now the question is the book actually any good? And I will give you the answer to that right after you press down richly on the like button for the YouTube algorithm. I also read 13 other books last month because I'm a lean reading machine, and I should probably tell you about them in this video too, because one of them is Arnold Schwarzenegger's new book, which is pretty much the most Schwarzenegger thing I've ever read in my entire life, and that's actually a compliment. And interestingly enough, there's another book that I read last month that might actually pinpoint the psychiatric condition that I think Arnold might have. I'll tell you about that one later on. And then there were some decent books that I won't spend too much time on, but I might mention them. One of them is Self-Discipline for Writers by Martin Meadows, which is not bad. It's just that I'd never make a whole video about it because it's not like phenomenal. Then there's another book called Opt Out by Dana Robinson, which I did quite like, but it's very similar to, at least in theory, to the 4-Hour Workweek. And I think the 4-Hour Workweek is much more comprehensive and in-depth, even if it is a little bit older. So if you like that one and like you've already read 4-Hour, then I don't think you need to read this one unless you're really into the idea of basically opting out of the way, most people are sort of taught to sort of accept the options that are presented to them in society, in the world, rather than sort of explore alternative modes of living, like ways of earning a living, of moving through the world. So it's that type of book, and it's good, but it's not like. But then there was a phenomenal time management book that I'll tell you about right after we talk about the Dennis one, because How to Get Rich by Felix Dennis is actually really, really well worth reading. One of my favorite quotes from the book, he says, "People who grow rich almost always improve their sex life. More people want to have sex with them. That's just the way human beings work." So that's kind of the irreverent tone that you get with this book, but there's something almost tragic to it as well, because he spends an awful lot of time convincing you not to try to get rich. Like, for one thing, it can be extremely difficult, obviously. It's uncertain, it takes a long time, it can ruin your relationships, alienate you from the people you work with, and on and on. And obviously he speaks from personal experience because, he's made like hundreds of millions of dollars in his business career, but then I mentioned that the book has a sort of tragic feel to it because you get the sense that he's suffered all of these losses that he's telling you about. The loss of friends, relationships, other priorities besides, making money in business. Like, he's sacrificed a lot, and then he's got to the end of his life, basically. Like, he's dead now. He died a few years ago. So he got to the end of his life, and you get the sense that he has a lot of regrets about how he did it, even though he knows how to do it. And the book is full of like phenomenal business advice. Like, he knows how to build great companies and generate tons of revenue. But there's something tragic about it because he's like, I wasted a lot of time doing this. And he does spend a lot of the book trying to convince you that it's not worth it, that you don't need to. And if you're not like the type of person who's like really sort of like just bent on getting after it and just making something huge happen, if you're not willing to sacrifice all of these things, he says don't even attempt it. Like, just find a good job and just do whatever you'd like. But all told, this is one of the best books that I've read all year. I will be thinking about it for a long time. I will remember it for a long time. And yeah, How to Get Rich by Felix Dennis. It is really, really good. And then there's this one, Buy Back Your Time by Dan Martell. And it's another business book, time management, of course. And you get the sense that he has far fewer regrets than Felix Dennis, even though he's like, comparably successful. He's a software entrepreneur with a ton of high-level demands on his time, and I was really impressed with the quality of the solutions that he's found to manage it all and make several different areas of his life world-class. The book is exactly what the title says it is. It's full of strategies and frameworks to help you determine what your time is actually worth, what you shouldn't spend it doing, who you can hire or find to help you, and things of that nature. And actually, there's probably more in here than most people will need or have to use, but it's one of those things you can sort of take what works for you and adapt what you can to your own situation, and it will help tremendously. I've implemented a ton of things from this book into my own life and work, and it saved me a bunch of time. Like, I've saved at least the amount of time that I spent reading it, and that's just now. So like, the compounding effects of all the saved time that I will save in the future will add up to a tremendous amount. So basically, the sooner you can read this book, the better. All right, just a couple more before I circle back to Arnold Schwarzenegger's book. This one is Journey to Itlan by Carlos Castaneda. I knew eventually that I would be making a YouTube video about it, and I would be forced to try and pronounce the title of this book, and I wouldn't be able to do it, and I knew that this would happen. So maybe not exact pronunciation, but also you should not trust anything really, at least not literally, that Carlos Castaneda says, but his books are brilliant, and I plan to read all 12 of them. This is the third one in the series, and it's really spectacular. The central character is himself, and the books follow his unreal apprenticeship under a mystic named Don Juan. Not that Don Juan, of course, we're talking about someone else. The general consensus here is that none of this stuff actually happened. He probably made up most of everything about Don Juan, if ever such a man even existed, and he later even formed a cult and basically retreated from public life almost entirely. So you might wonder why I love his books so much, even if I can't quite accept everything that he's telling me at face value. I'd say it's for much the same reason that I love Haruki Murakami and his magical realism, right? The style that he writes in. It's like you're in a world that's very similar to your own, but much more magical and mysterious than it ordinarily appears. And the sense that you get from reading these types of books is that you're getting closer to some sort of absolute truth inside of yourself, and that what's beneath normal everyday reality is something special and downright magical, if we're being honest, and most people just miss it if they're not really looking for it. I think everyday life is much more special than most people give it credit for. It's like they get up and go to a job that they don't like for 8 hours, and they sort of sleepwalk through the day and then come home and, you know, sleepwalk through the rest of the night just like scrolling on stuff. And there's a lot more to life and the universe than that. And his books, even maybe not, they're not strictly literally true, they're still absolutely worth reading, because that's the sort of world that he pulls you into. It's like the world that you already live in, but you forgot how amazing that it was. And he's sort of like, every book of his is a reminder of that. And so for that reason, I would read everything that Castaneda writes. The next book that I read last month is absolutely brilliant, probably one of my favorite books of all time. It's hilarious as well, and it's also probably what Arnold has, a hypomanic edge. So in this case, the prefix hypo refers to it being a little bit less than mania. So they're not like, the people who are hypomanics are not like manic, but they're a little bit less than, but they're still sort of, they have more energy and drive and enthusiasm than most people at sort of like an everyday level. So they're hypomanic. And the book is full of wild case studies about people throughout history who were probably hypomanics. So you've got people like Christopher Columbus, Alexander Hamilton, Craig Venter, a bunch of the original Hollywood moguls. Their stories are just insane. Which basically brings me to Arnold's book, because he says in Be Useful, and while I was definitely physically exhausted, mentally I was totally switched on. I was excited and energized because I'd just spent 2 hours moving closer to achieving my vision. How could you possibly expect me to sleep at a moment like that? Seriously, it's mostly hypomanics that would feel that way. And you've got this guy who basically, you know, left everything, left his home in Austria to give up his sort of certain small future or reduced future in exchange for like a big risk that he did not know how it was going to turn out, but he was going to go, he was going to leave everything behind, he was going to give up everything for this vision that he had, and then it sort of built into something else. And then he won all these bodybuilding shows, and then he started, you know, buying up real estate, and then getting into movies, and then, you know, politics and stuff like that. You know, it takes tremendous, you know, amount of energy to do that, and to even attempt that, or even, you know, the self-belief to believe that you could do that. And you know, obviously I'm not diagnosing him with hypomania. You know, I've read both books close to each other, and you know, I see similarities, but it would not surprise me in the slightest. And again, that's not a hit on Arnold. I loved Be Useful. I thought it was a phenomenal book, just like The Hypomanic Edge. Both of them are absolutely worth reading. Some of the best books I've read so far in 2023, and you know, I read close to 90 so far. All of the books that I mentioned in this video are down in the caption. I will see you in the next video, and hey, happy reading.
I don't waste time, no, I make time. All these people wanna hate, fine, I'ma make mine. While you sitting there complaining, I'll be training. While you sitting there just waiting, I'm creating. Yeah, sometimes I think that